I am Madeline, 33 years old, and until last month, I thought my biggest problem with my family was their endless financial demands. Then the bank called to tell me I owed $700,000 on a mortgage I never signed. It turned out my sister and her husband used my identity to buy their suburban dream house. At their lavish housewarming party surrounded by all their friends, they expected me to just swallow the debt. Instead, I slid a federal police report across the table and smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to financially cut off toxic relatives. The ringing of my phone shattered the quiet focus of my otherwise peaceful Friday evening. As a user experience design director for a technology firm in Chicago, my days were a relentless marathon of wireframes, stakeholder meetings, and user testing. By 7 in the evening, my brain was usually fried, and I relied on the absolute silence of my downtown apartment to decompress. I glanced at the caller ID on my screen. It read Wells Fargo Collections. I almost hit decline, assuming it was yet another sophisticated spam call. I did not have an account with Wells Fargo. My mortgage for my condo was through a local credit union, and my car had been paid off for 3 years. I swiped the green icon with a sigh, putting the phone on speaker as I walked toward my kitchen to pour a glass of water. "Hello," I said, my tone clipped and professional. "Good evening. This call is from Wells Fargo Home Lending. May I please speak with Madeline Hayes?" "This is Madeline," I replied, opening my refrigerator. "But I think you have the wrong number. I do not have any accounts with Wells Fargo." "Ma'am, this is our collections department. I am calling regarding your residential mortgage account. Your first payment of $5,420 was due on the 1st of the month, and we are currently showing it as 15 days past due. We are calling to secure payment today to avoid any negative reporting to the credit bureaus." I froze. The cold water bottle in my hand felt suddenly heavy. "Excuse me, $5,400. I do not have a mortgage with you. You absolutely have the wrong person. Ma'am, for security purposes, can you please verify the last 4 digits of your social security number?" A cold prickle of adrenaline washed over my skin. "I am not giving you my social security number over the phone. This is a scam." "I understand your hesitation, Ms. Hayes," the agent said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "If you prefer, I can read the last 4 digits we have on file for the primary borrower on this loan, and you can confirm if it matches. We have 8241. The air evaporated from my lungs. Those were the exact last 4 digits of my social security number. The prickle of adrenaline turned into a suffocating wave of ice. I set the water bottle down on the granite counter with a hard clunk. "Where is this property located?" I demanded, my voice suddenly tight. "I can only provide full property details if we complete the security verification, ma'am. Can you confirm your current date of birth?" I rattled it off automatically. My hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that I could not control. "Thank you," she said. "The property address on the mortgage is 402 Maplewood Drive, Oak Brook, Illinois. The loan was originated and funded 45 days ago for the principal amount of $700,000. As the sole borrower on this file, you are responsible for the monthly payments. Are you prepared to make a payment today?" My vision narrowed. Oak Brook, an affluent suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. I had never lived there. I had never even looked at properties there. I gripped the smooth edge of the kitchen island, my knuckles turning white. At 33 years old, I had spent the last decade painstakingly building my financial independence. I had an excellent credit score. I tracked my debt-to-income ratio like a hawk. I was diligent, responsible, and intensely private with my finances. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I did not sign any documents for a house in Oak Brook. I did not authorize a $700,000 loan. This is identity theft. Do not report this to the credit bureaus. I need to speak to your fraud department immediately. I can transfer you to our fraud intake division, ma'am, but please be advised that until a formal investigation is concluded, the account remains active and will accrue late fees." "Transfer me," I snapped. As the hold music chimed cheerfully through the speaker, my mind raced. Identity theft. How could this happen? I used authentication apps on every account. I shredded my mail. I never used public wireless networks for banking. As I waited on hold, I pulled out my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I logged directly into my credit monitoring account, a service I paid for precisely to monitor my credit health. The dashboard loaded. My pristine credit score was staring back at me, but right below it in the recent activity section was a glaring, massive red flag. New account added. Wells Fargo Home Mortgage. Balance $700,000. It was not a mistake. It was not a glitch in the system. Someone had stolen my entire financial identity, walked into a bank, and purchased a luxury home under my name. The sheer scale of the fraud was breathtaking. You do not just accidentally take out a mortgage. It requires tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements, and multiple forms of government identification. It requires an extensive, heavily vetted paper trail. Whoever did this had complete and total access to the most intimate details of my life. The hold music clicked off, and a new representative answered. Wells Fargo Fraud Division. My name is David. How can I help you? Before I could even open my mouth to speak to the fraud representative, my cell phone vibrated violently against the granite countertop. A notification popped down from the very top of my screen. It was the family group chat. The timing was so abrupt it felt like a physical blow. I glanced at the screen. The message was from my younger sister, Brittany. Dreams do come true. We finally did it. Jamal and I are officially homeowners. Come celebrate with us next Saturday for our housewarming party. Beneath the text was a photo. Brittany, blonde, perfectly manicured, and smiling radiantly, stood next to her husband, Jamal. Jamal, a tall, sharply dressed African-American man who worked as a mortgage broker, had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, looking incredibly smug. Behind them stood a massive, newly constructed brick house with pristine landscaping and double mahogany front doors. And right there, bolted to the stone pillar next to the driveway, was a gleaming brass plaque with the house numbers. 402. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the brass numbers burning into my retinas. The address the collections agent had just read to me echoed in my head. 402 Maplewood Drive. My lungs completely seized in my chest. The entire universe suddenly seemed to tilt violently on its axis, pulling the gravity straight out from under my feet, leaving me breathless. Are you still there? David asked. I hung up immediately. My hands shook violently. I zoomed in on Brittany's photo. There they were, posing like royalty. Brittany, chronically unemployed, held champagne. Jamal flashed his charming mortgage broker smile. My phone chimed. And again. The group chat erupted. Mom texted, "Oh, my beautiful girl, we are so proud of you. You deserve this home." Dad replied, "Hard work pays off. That is my girl. Jamal, you pulled through. See you next weekend. Hard work." I let out a hysterical laugh. Brittany had not worked since she was 24. She constantly begged our parents for money. Jamal was a smooth-talking broker with maxed-out credit cards. Jamal had a credit score in the low 500s. He had complained about it at Thanksgiving. Yet here they stood in front of a $700,000 property. I dragged my eyes back to my laptop. The credit report was still open. I clicked the account breakdown. Account. Type conventional real estate mortgage. Term 30 years. Interest rate 6.5%. Monthly payment $5,420. Sole borrower, Madeline Hayes. I felt violated. The sheer magnitude of the deception was paralyzing. This was federal fraud. This was my sister chaining me to massive debt that could ruin my life and destroy my career. In the corporate tech world, background checks were standard for executive leadership positions. A default on a massive mortgage would obliterate my professional standing. How did they pull this off? My mind began to race, transitioning from shock into the sharp analytical state that made me successful at my job. To originate a mortgage, you needed a mountain of documentation. You needed an underwriter to verify employment. Jamal. The name hit me like a freight train. Jamal was a mortgage broker. He had intimate knowledge of the loan origination system. He knew exactly how to bypass red flags. He had access to document portals and underwriting software. He knew how to package a file to make it look flawless to an automated system. But even a corrupt broker needs the actual documents. He would need my social security number, which is not hard for family members to find. But he would also need my recent pay stubs, my bank statements showing cash reserves, and my tax forms. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands against my forehead. 3 months ago, Easter Sunday. I had driven out to my parents' house in the suburbs. I had brought my work tote bag with me because I was in the middle of refinancing my condo. I had printed out a physical folder containing my last 2 years of tax returns, my recent pay stubs, and printouts of my brokerage accounts. I had left that tote bag in my father's home office while we ate dinner. Brittany and Jamal had been there. I distinctly remembered Jamal excusing himself to take a business call in the office for 20 minutes. My stomach heaved. He had gone into my bag. He had photographed the documents right out of my tote while I was sitting in the dining room eating dinner with my parents. But it could not just be Jamal and Brittany. A mortgage lender requires a verification of employment. They would have had to contact my employer, unless Jamal had routed the verification to a fake domain. As a tech professional, I knew how easy it was to register a domain that looked almost identical to my company website and set up an email address to intercept the verification. I stared at the group chat on my phone. My mother was sending heart emojis. My father was praising Jamal. Did they know? My parents had spent their entire lives enabling Brittany. She was the golden child, the one who needed constant rescuing, while I was the independent daughter who never needed their help. They had always treated my success as a personal affront, constantly telling me I was selfish for not financially supporting my sister. I picked up my phone. I did not text the group chat. I dialed my mother directly. It rang twice before she answered, her voice bubbling with artificial joy. "Madeline, did you see the photos? Is it not wonderful? Your sister finally has a beautiful home." I kept my voice dead flat. Neutral. "It is a huge house, Mom. How exactly did Jamal and Brittany afford a $700,000 home in Oakbrook when neither of them has 2 dimes to rub together?" My mother scoffed, the joy instantly replaced by defensive irritation. "There you go, always so negative and jealous. Jamal is a brilliant broker. He worked his magic with the paperwork. He told us he found a special program that did not require Brittany to show her income. He handled all the heavy lifting. You should be congratulating them, Madeline, not interrogating me." A special program, I repeated, the cold fury wrapping around my heart. Did Jamal happen to mention what this program was called? "I do not know the technical terms, Madeline. He just said he used some family leverage to get the approval through. You really should be completely happy for your sister. We are celebrating next Saturday, and I expect you to be there with a smile on your face. Family leverage." The 2 words echoed in the sudden silence of my kitchen like a death knell for our entire relationship. She knew. Maybe she did not know the exact legal terminology of identity theft, but she knew they had used my name. And she did not care. I stood in the absolute silence of my cold apartment, clutching my phone tightly. The reality of the situation washed over me completely. I was entirely alone. My own parents had thrown me to the wolves just to keep their golden child perfectly happy, and they would pay a very heavy price for it. The phone screen went black in my hand, reflecting my exhausted face in the dark kitchen. The phrase "family leverage" kept looping in my mind. Susan and Thomas had not just looked the other way. They had actively handed me over so their precious Brittany could play house in a neighborhood she could never afford. I walked back to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. If I was going to dismantle this, I needed to understand the exact anatomy of the crime. I needed to know how Jamal bypassed the system. As a user experience design director, I spent my life identifying loopholes. The banking industry was heavily regulated. Everything is digital. Everything leaves a footprint. I started researching mortgage origination software. Jamal worked for a mid-sized brokerage. He would have used an automated underwriting system. To get a loan approved without a human underwriter scrutinizing every page, a broker needs an immaculate file. High credit score, perfect debt-to-income ratio, and solid employment history. My financial profile was the golden ticket, but the system still required verification. I stared at the blinking cursor, piecing together the timeline. Jamal needed supporting documents. He needed my tax returns, my pay stubs, and my bank statements. I closed my eyes and mentally walked through that Easter dinner 3 months ago. I had arrived at my parents' house in Naperville around 2 in the afternoon. I was carrying my black leather tote bag, which contained a physical folder of my financial documents for my condo refinancing. I had placed the tote bag on the armchair in my father's home office. During appetizers, Brittany was whining loudly about her cramped apartment. She was putting on a performance for Thomas and Susan, playing the victim. Jamal had excused himself from the dining table. He said he had to take an urgent call from a client. He was gone for almost 40 minutes. I vividly remembered him walking back into the dining room, sliding his phone into his pocket, and exchanging a specific triumphant look with Brittany. He had not been on a phone call. He had been in the study. He had gone straight into my bag. He likely photographed every single page of my tax returns and pay stubs, scanning the documents directly into his brokerage app. But documents alone do not clear a loan to close. The lender requires a verification of employment to ensure the borrower actually works where they say they do. If the lender had contacted my company, I would have known. My human resources director would have messaged me immediately. So how did Jamal intercept the verification? I opened my company directory and looked at our domain structure. Jamal was cunning. He must have registered a fake domain name that looked nearly identical to my company domain, changing perhaps one single letter. He routed the verification forms to that fake domain, acted as his own human resources representative, and verified my employment himself. It was a textbook wire fraud scheme. Then came the question of the closing documents. Buying a house requires a title company and a notary public to verify the identity of the person signing the closing disclosures. I pulled up the public property records for DuPage County. I paid the $10 fee to download the recorded deed for 402 Maplewood Drive. The document loaded on my screen in high resolution. There was my name, Madeline Hayes, listed as the sole grantee. And right there on the final page was a notary stamp. The signature belonged to an independent notary. I searched the name online. She was a mobile notary frequently contracted by Jamal's specific brokerage. He had paid off a dirty notary to stamp the paperwork without me being in the room. My chest tightened with cold fury. They had thought of everything, but there was one massive, glaring detail that did not make sense. A $700,000 house requires a down payment. Jamal and Brittany had zero savings. They lived paycheck to paycheck. Where did they get $70,000 to $100,000 in cash to close this deal? I pulled my own bank statements from the last 3 months. My savings accounts were entirely untouched. My checking account balances were perfectly normal. They had not stolen my cash. So where did the money come from? A lender requires proof of funds. You have to show where the down payment originated. If Jamal used his own bank accounts, the underwriter would have rejected the file. The money had to look like it belonged to me, or it had to be a documented gift. I thought back to my phone call with Susan. She had been so defensive. Jamal used some family leverage to get the approval through. The sickening truth hit me. Thomas and Susan had provided the down payment. My parents had likely drained their retirement savings or taken out a home equity line of credit to hand Brittany $100,000 in cash. Jamal then drafted a fraudulent gift letter claiming the money was a family gift to me, Madeline Hayes, for the purchase of a primary residence. My parents had actively funded the very transaction designed to destroy my financial future. I sat back in my chair, staring at the digital evidence scattered across my screen. The betrayal was so absolute, so flawlessly executed, that it left no room for familial reconciliation. They had completely insulated the transaction. Jamal had fed the bank falsified documents, signed my name via a fake email address, and used my parents' cash to close the deal. They thought they were untouchable. They thought my sense of duty would force me to eat the debt, and keep quiet to protect the family reputation. They were wrong. I reached for my printer and hit print on the recorded deed, the credit report, and the property tax records. I stacked the papers neatly into a crisp manila folder. The digital clock on my laptop read 3 in the morning. I had 5 hours before the bank opened. I was not going to cry, and I was not going to negotiate. I was going to walk into that bank and start a fire that would burn their entire world to the ground. The digital clock glowed 3:15 in the morning. I stared at the manila folder I had just assembled, but a nagging thought tugged at the back of my mind. Photographs of documents can sometimes be rejected by automated underwriting systems if the resolution is poor or if glare obscures the text. Lenders often require scanned documents of the original physical copies. If Jamal used his phone to photograph my tax returns while rummaging through my tote bag in a rush, the quality might not have been sufficient for a strict underwriter. I needed to know exactly what was taken. I pushed away from my kitchen island and walked down the short hallway to my home office. I opened the bottom drawer of my heavy oak filing cabinet where I kept my archived financial records. I pulled out the thick, expandable file labeled for the current tax year. This was the master file where I returned all my documents after the condo refinancing process I started earlier this spring. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor and began flipping through the meticulously labeled tabs. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property tax receipts, everything was in its proper place. Then I reached the tab labeled Tax Returns and W-2 Forms. I opened it. The folder was completely empty. My stomach dropped as a wave of nausea washed over me. Jamal had not just quickly photographed my documents. The physical original copies of my W-2 forms from the last 2 years were gone. They were entirely missing from my apartment. My mind snapped back to that Easter Sunday dinner. I replayed the entire afternoon in my head, analyzing every interaction, every movement frame by frame like a security camera feed. I had placed my black leather tote bag on the leather armchair in my father's study. The tote had a zippered middle compartment where I kept the sensitive documents in a sealed waterproof envelope. Jamal did not know my organizational system. If he had gone into that bag blindly, he would have had to unpack the entire thing, sift through my laptop, my notebooks, and my makeup bag, leaving a noticeable mess. But when I retrieved my bag at the end of the night, everything was perfectly in place. The zipper was closed exactly as I had left it. Someone who knew my habits had to have helped him. Someone who knew exactly how I packed my work bags. The sickening realization struck me so hard, I physically doubled over on the office floor, gasping for air. My father. Thomas was a meticulous man who had taught me everything about organization. He knew my filing system because he had practically drilled it into me when I was a teenager. More importantly, he was the only other person in that house who knew I was actively carrying those specific documents that day. I had mentioned to him in the kitchen that I was dropping my refinancing paperwork off at the credit union the following Monday morning. I had literally handed him the timeline and the location of the documents on a silver platter. The memory of that afternoon sharpened with horrifying clarity. While Jamal was supposedly taking his urgent business call in the study, my father had abruptly stood up from the dining table. He announced he was going to the study to offer Jamal a glass of scotch. He had been gone for at least 10 minutes. And what was my mother doing during those 10 minutes? Susan had suddenly become incredibly talkative. She had cornered me in the dining room, aggressively filling my wine glass, and launching into a long, dramatic monologue about how hard Brittany was struggling. She kept me pinned in my seat, demanding my full attention, ensuring I would not get up and walk down the hall toward the study. They had coordinated it. They had actively run interference. My own mother distracted me while my father walked into the study, unzipped my bag, and handed my sealed tax documents directly to the man plotting to steal my identity. My parents were not merely passive enablers who looked the other way when Jamal presented a shady financial scheme. They were active accomplices in a federal crime. They had orchestrated the theft of my W-2 forms in their own home under the guise of a holiday dinner. They had served me baked ham and poured me wine while actively plotting to saddle me with a $700,000 fraudulent debt. The level of premeditated malice was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It was a perfectly executed betrayal by the very people who were supposed to protect me from the rest of the world. Now they were my greatest enemies. Why? The question burned in my throat. I knew they favored Brittany, but this was absolute destruction. Then I remembered my father's bitter comments over the years. You make too much money for someone with no family. You should be sharing your wealth. They felt entitled to my success. They believed that because I was unmarried and financially secure, I had a moral obligation to fund Brittany's life. In their twisted, toxic logic, stealing my financial identity was not a crime. It was simply a forced redistribution of resources. They saw my pristine credit score and my high income as family assets that they had the right to leverage for their favorite child. It did not matter if I was destroyed in the process, as long as Brittany had a massive house to show off to her friends. Their superficial image meant more to them than my entire existence. I sat on the cold floor of my office for a long time, staring at the empty tax folder in my lap. Any lingering sense of familial loyalty evaporated, replaced by a permanent freezing void. The people who raised me were completely dead to me. They were no longer my parents, and Brittany was no longer my sister. They were simply hostile liabilities that needed to be neutralized. I would not allow them to dictate the rest of my life. The sun was beginning to rise over the Chicago skyline, casting a pale gray light through my office window. It was time to get to work. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and began to get dressed for the day ahead. I chose a sharp-tailored black suit, a crisp white blouse, and my most uncomfortable pair of leather heels. The kind of suit you wear when you are about to absolutely dismantle an empire. I grabbed my leather briefcase, slid the printed evidence inside, and locked my apartment door. The morning air was crisp as I stepped onto the Chicago pavement. I did not walk toward the train that usually took me to the tech campus. Instead, I drafted a concise email to my vice president. I stated I had a severe family emergency requiring my immediate attention, and I would be completely offline for the next 48 hours. I hit send immediately. My career was my sanctuary, but if I did not ruthlessly sever this fraudulent anchor, I would not have a career left to protect. Executive background checks do not tolerate unexplained $700,000 defaults. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address for the regional corporate headquarters of Wells Fargo in the financial district. This was the commercial hub, the place equipped with regional managers and high-level fraud investigators. When the cab pulled up to the towering glass building, I paid the fare and stepped out. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer, squared my shoulders, and walked through the revolving doors with the kind of cold authority that makes security guards step aside. The lobby was expansive, filled with the low hum of corporate banking. I bypassed the teller queues entirely. I walked directly to the mahogany reception desk in front of the executive offices. A polished administrative assistant looked up, her professional smile securely in place. "Good morning, how can I direct you today?" My voice was dangerously calm, carrying across the quiet reception area. "My name is Madeline Hayes. I am the victim of a massive coordinated identity theft resulting in a fraudulent $700,000 mortgage originated through this institution. I require an immediate in-person meeting with your regional fraud director. I will not be leaving this building until I have the complete digital origination file in my hands." Her smile faltered, hands hovering over the keyboard. "I am sorry, madam, those appointments require advanced scheduling." I dropped my heavy briefcase on her desk with a thud. "Check your internal system for account ending in 4409. It is currently in collections. If a fraud director is not sitting across from me in the next 5 minutes, my very next stop is the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, followed immediately by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I will name this specific branch in my report for refusing to assist a victim of federal wire fraud." She swallowed hard quickly, typing the account number. Her eyes widened as the red flags undoubtedly populated on her screen. "Please take a seat in the lounge, Ms. Hayes. I will get someone immediately." I did not sit. I stood perfectly still, watching the glass doors. Minutes later, a tall man in a tailored gray suit hurried out of a corner office holding a tablet. He looked tense. "Ms. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "I am Richard Vance, the Regional Director of Risk Management. Please come into my office." I ignored his hand and followed him into the glass-walled room. He closed the door, shutting out the lobby noise. Richard gestured to a leather chair, but I preferred to remain standing. I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out my manila folder. 3 days ago, your collections department contacted me regarding a property in Oak Brook, Illinois, I stated, slapping the printed deed onto his desk. I did not purchase this property. I have never visited this property. A third-party mortgage broker named Jamal Davis stole my financial documents and bypassed your underwriting system to secure this loan. He then used a fraudulent mobile notary to forge my signature on the closing disclosures. I need the complete electronic file, including the digital signature certificates, right now. Richard adjusted his glasses, looking at the deed and then at his tablet. Identity theft of this magnitude is incredibly rare, Ms. Hayes. Our underwriting protocols are stringent. Your protocols failed catastrophically, I countered, leaning over his desk. And your institution is currently holding a severely toxic asset. If you want to mitigate your liability, you will open the electronic origination logs and show me the digital trail. Richard hesitated, but the sheer gravity of my documentation left him no choice. He turned his monitor so we could both see the screen. He entered his administrative credentials and pulled up the master file for the Oak Brook property. The screen populated with hundreds of pages of digital documents. Scroll down to the final closing disclosures, I commanded. He scrolled through the uniform residential loan application, past the fake verification of employment that Jamal had fabricated, and finally reached the massive packet of closing documents. These were the documents that required my legally binding signature to finalize the massive loan. I pointed to the digital signature line at the bottom of the first page. Open the DocuSign audit trail. Every time a digital document is signed, the software generates a tamper-evident certificate. This certificate records the exact time, the email address, and the precise Internet Protocol address of the device used to execute the signature. Richard clicked the small icon bringing up the master certificate. I scanned the data, my eyes narrowing. There it was. The email address used to route all the electronic signatures was registered as m.hayes.vertex@gmail.com. I do not use Gmail for anything, I said, pointing at the screen. I use a secure encrypted provider for personal matters, and my corporate email does not use my initial. Jamal created a burner email address specifically to intercept the signing links. Richard was pale. Look at the Internet Protocol address, he said softly, pointing to a string of numbers logged next to the signature timestamp. The geographical pin dropped directly onto an address in Schaumburg, Illinois. That is the exact location of his mortgage office. Print that entire log right now. Richard nodded, his fingers moving frantically across his keyboard to send the audit logs to the heavy industrial printer in the corner of his office. The machine hummed to life, churning out page after page of undeniable digitized proof of Jamal committing federal wire fraud. I stood by the printer, collecting the warm sheets of paper and sliding them carefully into my leather briefcase. This changes everything, Ms. Hayes, Richard said, his voice trembling slightly as he watched me gather the evidence. I am officially freezing this account right now. Our internal fraud division will seize the master file immediately, and we will be contacting the federal authorities by the end of the day. The mortgage broker will be thoroughly investigated, and we will likely move to repossess the Oak Brook property to mitigate our financial exposure. Make sure you do, I replied, securing the heavy brass clasp on my briefcase. I will be submitting my own police report with the local financial crimes unit this afternoon. Expect a subpoena for these exact documents. I did not wait for his apology or his hollow corporate pleasantries. I turned and walked out of his glass office, leaving him to deal with the radioactive fallout of his bank's massive underwriting failure. I navigated back through the quiet corporate lobby and pushed through the heavy revolving doors, stepping out into the bright Chicago morning. The crisp air filled my lungs, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt a sharp, dangerous sense of total control. I had the weapon. I just needed to choose the exact moment to deploy it. As I stood on the busy sidewalk to hail a passing taxi, my cell phone vibrated violently inside my coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. Jamal Davis. The timing was almost too perfect. He must have received an automated alert from the underwriting system the second Richard accessed and froze the master file. Or perhaps the title company system flagged a high-level inquiry. Either way, Jamal knew someone was looking directly at his fraudulent masterpiece. I did not answer the phone immediately. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my secondary work phone, opening the voice memo application, and pressing the red button to start recording. I placed both devices on the hood of a parked car, took a deep, steadying breath, and swiped the screen to answer the call. "Hello, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Maddie." "Hey, sister-in-law." Jamal's voice boomed through the speaker, oozing with that fake, overly aggressive salesman charisma that always made my skin crawl. "Listen, I just got a weird notification from the bank portal. It looks like you went down to a local branch today. Is everything good?" I stared at the recording timer ticking upward on my work phone. "I received a collections call on Friday night, Jamal. The mortgage on the Oak Brook house is past due. Care to explain why my name is on a $700,000 loan that I never signed for?" There was a brief pause on the line. The fake cheerfulness evaporated instantly, replaced by a smooth, patronizing tone that felt like oil slicking over concrete. "Look, Maddie, let us not overreact. We just borrowed your credit profile for a minute. Brittany really wanted this house, and the real estate market is crazy right now. Our debt-to-income ratio was a little high, so I just structured the file using your statistics to get us a better interest rate. It is family leverage. No big deal." "No big deal." The sheer audacity of his words echoed in the busy street. "You committed identity theft and mortgage fraud, Jamal. You stole my tax documents out of my bag on Easter Sunday." "Oh, come on! Do not use those ugly words!" He scoffed, his arrogance shining clearly through the speaker. "We are family. Family helps family. You know Brittany deserves a nice home. I missed the first payment because of some transfer issues with my commercial bank account, but I am making the payment tomorrow morning. You do not have to pay a single dime. We live in the house, we pay the mortgage, and you get the benefit of a massive on-time loan reporting to your credit history. It is a win for everyone involved." "It is a federal felony," I corrected him, my voice slicing through his pathetic justifications. "And you forged my signature on the closing documents using a fake email address and an internet protocol address located inside your own Schaumburg office." Jamal let out an exasperated sigh, completely unbothered by the fact that I had just outlined his entire criminal operation. "Maddie, stop being so dramatic. The house is bought. The deal is completely done. If you blow the whistle on this, you are going to put your own sister on the street, and you are going to ruin my career over a minor technicality. Are you really going to destroy your own family over some paperwork? Just sit tight, smile at the housewarming party on Saturday, and let it go. Do not be that bitter, selfish sister everyone always says you are." I let his words hang in the heavy air. He was using the exact same emotional manipulation my parents had used for decades. He thought I was incredibly weak. He thought the fear of being ostracized by my toxic family would force me into quiet compliance. He genuinely believed that labeling me as bitter and selfish would somehow guilt me into accepting a $700,000 fraudulent debt without a fight. "Are my parents aware of the exact mechanics of this loan?" I asked, needing to get it perfectly on the recording. "Your dad handed me the tax folder himself." Jamal bragged, a sickening chuckle escaping his throat. "Thomas and Susan put down the $100,000 for the down payment. They wanted Brittany to have this house just as much as I did. They knew you would never agree to co-sign, so we took the initiative. They are fully on board, Maddie. It is 3 against 1. You have no leverage here. Just accept the favor we did for your credit score and show up to the party on Saturday." He ended the call, leaving the dial tone blaring. I stood on the Chicago sidewalk. I pressed stop on the recording application on my work phone and instantly backed the audio file up to 3 separate secure cloud drives. He had not just admitted to federal wire fraud. He had actively implicated my parents in the theft of my documents and the funding of the fraudulent down payment. He had handed me the final nail for their collective coffin on a silver platter. I hailed a passing taxi and slid into the back seat, instructing the driver to head toward the Financial Crimes Police Precinct. Jamal thought this was a game of family dynamics and emotional blackmail. He thought his smooth talking could override the strict, uncompromising reality of real estate law. But Jamal was a sloppy, arrogant fool. He had entirely missed the most critical, devastating detail of the real estate law he had manipulated. Because my credit was used and my name was forged as the sole borrower, the deed to the Oak Brook house was 100% in my name. Legally, I owned his dream house. I immediately told the taxi driver to change the final destination address. I wanted to look my parents in the eyes one last time to see if there was any real remorse. I went to my car and drove toward Naperville. The drive took nearly an hour, giving me time to mentally prepare for the confrontation. I pulled into the wide, pristine driveway of my childhood home. I parked directly behind my father's luxury sedan, turned off the engine, and stepped out. I did not bother knocking. I used my heavy brass key and pushed the front door open. The house smelled strongly of lemon polish and expensive vanilla candles. I walked straight into the living room and found them exactly where I expected. My mother Susan was addressing invitations to the housewarming party. My father Thomas was nursing a glass of scotch. They both looked up startled by my sudden appearance. "Madeline," my mother said, placing her pen down on the coffee table. Her tone was a mixture of surprise and immediate irritation. "What are you doing here? Do you not have work?" I stood in the center of the plush living room, my hands resting at my sides. I did not take off my coat. "I just got off the phone with Jamal," I said, keeping my voice incredibly even. "He told me exactly how he acquired the physical copies of my tax returns on Easter Sunday. He told me about the $100,000 you two provided for the down payment." My father reached for the television remote and muted the golf tournament. The sudden silence in the room was suffocating. He did not look shocked. He did not look ashamed. "I told that boy to keep his mouth shut," Thomas muttered. "He talks too much when he gets nervous." "That is your response?" I asked, the sheer audacity freezing the blood in my veins. "You actively distracted me in the dining room while my own father went into my private bag, stole my financial documents, and handed them to a criminal. You funded a fraudulent real estate transaction to chain me to a massive, unauthorized debt, and your only regret is that Jamal admitted it to me on the phone." Susan stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive cashmere sweater. Her face hardened, entirely devoid of maternal warmth. "Stop using such dramatic language, Madeline. Nobody stole anything from you. Jamal just needed a temporary sponsor to get the underwriting approved. Your sister has been struggling for years living in that tiny apartment while you sit in a luxury downtown condo hoarding your wealth. You have a pristine credit score that you are doing absolutely nothing with. You do not have a husband. You do not have children to provide for. It is incredibly selfish to keep all of those financial resources to yourself when your family needs help." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling entirely detached. She was not a mother. She was a parasite defending another parasite. "Selfish." I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think I am selfish because I refuse to be the unconsenting victim of federal wire fraud." Jamal forged my signature. He bypassed the bank's security protocols. And when the mortgage inevitably defaults, it will permanently ruin my financial standing and likely cost me my executive career. My father slammed his glass down on the wooden side table. He stood up, his face flushed with defensive anger. "Do not be ridiculous. Jamal is going to make the payments. He just had a small cash flow problem this month because his commissions were delayed. You make a ridiculous amount of money for a single woman, Madeline. If he is a little short, you should step up and cover the difference. It is the least you can do for your sister. Family helps family. That is how the real world works." I looked at Thomas, the man who had preached personal responsibility to me for my entire childhood. He was completely delusional, entirely captivated by the superficial image of his golden child living in a mansion. "The real world," I said coldly, "sends people to federal prison for mortgage fraud. The real world does not care about your twisted definition of family loyalty. You gave them your retirement savings. You drained your own accounts to give them $100,000 for a down payment, and you disguised it as a gift from me. When the authorities audit that transaction, you are both going to be indicted as accomplices." Susan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, please. You are not going to the police, Madeline. You are not going to destroy your own family and put your sister out on the street. You are just throwing a tantrum because you were not consulted. You will calm down, you will come to the housewarming party on Saturday, and you will smile for the photographs. If you dare to ruin this for Brittany, we will completely disown you. You will never be welcome in this house again. The threat hung in the air. For 33 years, I had craved their approval. I had tolerated the slights and the constant demands for money. But looking at their arrogant, entitled faces, the invisible chains finally snapped. I am not throwing a tantrum. I am not here to negotiate. You disowning me is not a punishment. It is a liberation. I turned and walked toward the front door. Madeline, my father barked. You are going to let this go, or I will make sure everyone knows exactly how vindictive you really are. I stopped looking over my shoulder with absolute icy calm. Tell them whatever you want. I have the recorded phone calls and the fraudulent deed. I will see you both on Saturday. I opened the door, stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, and walked away from the hollow facade of my childhood home forever. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, severing 33 years of desperate loyalty. I walked down the paved driveway toward my car, my leather heels clicking rhythmically against the concrete. The crisp afternoon air hit my face, but I felt entirely numb. I reached my car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. I closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet cabin. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. My chest heaved, and for exactly 2 minutes the dam broke. Hot, bitter tears spilled over my eyelashes and tracked down my cheeks. I was not crying because I was afraid of the massive debt. I was not crying because Jamal had stolen my identity. I was crying for the little girl who had spent her entire life trying to earn the love of a mother and father who viewed her as nothing more than an exploitable asset. I mourned the family I thought existed. They had sat in that immaculate living room and confidently told me that my destruction was simply the price to secure her happiness. They had demanded my silent compliance under the threat of abandonment, completely failing to realize that abandoning me was the greatest gift they could ever bestow. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked, shifting to 4:15 in the afternoon. With that subtle change in time, the tears simply stopped. It was not a gradual fading of sorrow. It was a sudden, absolute shutdown of the emotional bleeding. The biological imperative to seek their parental approval completely vanished, replaced by a crystalline, freezing clarity. The emotional death of my familial bonds was instantaneous and absolute. I reached into the center console, pulled out a tissue, and wiped my face clean. I adjusted the rearview mirror, making direct eye contact with my own reflection. My eyes were red, but they were entirely devoid of fear. I started the engine. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the driveway. I did not look back at the house. There was absolutely nothing left for me in that structure. As I merged onto the highway heading back toward downtown Chicago, my mind shifted away from the past and locked onto the immediate future. The grief was gone. The calculation began. I was a user experience design director. My entire career was built on understanding complex systems, anticipating human behavior, and exploiting structural vulnerabilities to achieve a specific outcome. Jamal and my parents had built a flawed system. They had focused entirely on the acquisition of the asset, completely ignoring the legal architecture required to sustain it. Jamal was arrogant enough to believe that stealing my financial profile was a victimless crime because he intended to make the monthly payments. But he was a careless, sloppy criminal. He had fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamics of the trap he had built. He had forged my signature on the uniform residential loan application. He had forged my signature on the closing disclosures. He had used a fake email address to secure the final approvals. But in doing so, he had chained the property entirely to me. because my pristine credit and my substantial income were the sole factors that allowed the underwriting system to clear the transaction. The title company had recorded the deed exclusively in my name. Jamal and Brittany were nowhere on the legal documentation. They were not on the mortgage. They were not on the title. Legally speaking, they were just unauthorized squatters living in my luxury home. And that $100,000 down payment my parents had secretly provided to clear the closing costs was legally registered as a gift to the primary borrower. It was a gift to me. The highway traffic blurred past my windows as the strategy crystallized in my mind. Jamal thought he held the leverage because he had physical possession of the house. He thought I would be paralyzed by the fear of public scandal. He fundamentally underestimated my capacity for absolute calculated ruthlessness. I did not want an apology. I did not want him to assume the loan. I wanted to execute a flawless, systematic dismantling of their entire lives. I mapped out the exact sequence of events required to spring the trap. First, I needed the criminal foundation. Tomorrow morning, I would formally submit the massive binder of evidence to the Financial Crimes Division, securing an official police report for felony identity theft and wire fraud. That police report was the ultimate trump card. It would instantly trigger a federal investigation, permanently freezing the mortgage and rendering his empty promises to pay useless. Second, I needed legal authority over the physical asset. I needed a ruthless real estate attorney to confirm my absolute ownership of the property based on the recorded deed. I needed to ensure that when I dropped the hammer, Jamal and Brittany would have zero legal recourse to claim tenancy or ownership. They had handed me the legal rights to a $700,000 property, and I was going to leverage those rights to completely ruin them. Third, I needed professional execution. By filing a formal complaint with the licensing board, I would ensure Jamal lost his career. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my apartment building. I parked my car, grabbed my briefcase, and took the elevator. I unlocked my door and stepped into the sanctuary of my home. I walked straight to my home office and dragged a large whiteboard out from the corner. I drew a timeline. At the far right end, I wrote Saturday housewarming party. I had exactly 4 days to finalize the trap. My family had spent my entire life trying to tear me down. Now I held the absolute power to level their world. I looked at the whiteboard, a cold smile spreading across my face. I was not just going to attend their party. I was going to burn the house down. Tuesday morning brought the unforgiving chill of early Chicago spring. I woke exactly at 5:30, my mind operating with ruthless efficiency. I showered, dressed in a tailored suit, and packed my heavy leather briefcase. Inside were the Wells Fargo origination documents, the printed digital signature logs, the recorded audio files on a secure flash drive, and the property deed. I skipped coffee entirely. My adrenaline was enough. I hailed a cab directing the driver to the Central Police Precinct. The precinct was an imposing concrete structure entirely disconnected from my corporate world. I walked through the double doors at 8. The reception area was chaotic, filled with officers and civilians. I approached the front desk. A tired desk sergeant barely glanced up. I placed my hands flat on the counter. "I need to speak with a financial crimes detective immediately," I stated. "I am reporting a 6-figure wire fraud scheme involving a federal mortgage." The sergeant paused. He looked up, scanning my professional attire and heavy briefcase. "That is a serious allegation. Do you have physical proof?" I tapped the leather surface of my briefcase. "I have the complete digital origination file from Wells Fargo, including the forged electronic certificates and the fraudulent Internet Protocol logs. I have an audio recording of the primary suspect confessing to the theft of my tax documents." The sergeant blinked, realizing this was not a standard complaint. "Take a seat," he said, picking up his phone. "I will call the fraud division right now." Minutes later, a man wearing a wrinkled suit walked out. He had the exhausted eyes of someone who looked at the worst of human nature. "Ms. Hayes?" he asked, holding a notepad. I nodded. I am Detective Vance. Come with me. I followed him through the cubicles to a windowless office. He offered me a chair across from his metal desk. Sit down. The sergeant said you have evidence of real estate fraud. I placed my briefcase on his desk and pulled out the manila folder. I wasted no time with emotional backstories. I spoke exactly as I presented roadmaps to my executive board. Pure facts. 3 days ago, I discovered that a mortgage broker named Jamal Davis stole my physical tax documents and used my financial profile to secure a $700,000 residential loan in Oak Brook. I slid the recorded property deed across the desk. This is the deed registered exclusively in my name. I then slid the Wells Fargo origination packet next to it. These are the internal banking logs. They prove the electronic signatures were executed from a fake email address created in my name, and the Internet Protocol address maps directly to his commercial brokerage office. Detective Vance picked up the deed, his eyes scanning the legal text before moving to the banking logs. He pulled a pen from his shirt pocket and began tracing the lines of data on the electronic certificates. His initial skepticism vanished entirely, replaced by intense focus. "You also have an audio confession?" he asked. I placed the small, secure flash drive onto the desk. "He called me yesterday. He admitted to using my credit profile without my consent. He admitted that my parents provided the $100,000 down payment under the guise of a fraudulent gift letter to clear the closing costs. He stated he forged the paperwork to secure a house for his wife, my sister." Detective Vance leaned back in his chair, letting out a long whistle. "So this is a family operation. They stole your identity to buy a luxury house, and they expected you to just eat the debt in silence." "That is exactly what they expected," I replied, my voice completely deadpan. "They assumed my sense of familial duty would prevent me from walking into this building and handing you this folder." Detective Vance plugged the flash drive into his terminal. He clicked the audio file. Jamal's arrogant, condescending voice filled the small office, boasting about family leverage. As the recording played, Vance took detailed notes, his pen scratching rapidly against his pad. When the recording ended, he ejected the drive and looked at me with grim realization. "Ms. Hayes, this is not just identity theft. By transmitting fraudulent documents to a federally insured institution, he has committed federal wire fraud. The moment I file this report, it goes straight to the federal level. The state attorney general will be involved. The broker will lose his license, face massive fines, and likely serve a substantial prison sentence. Are you fully prepared for the collateral damage this will cause your family?" I looked directly into his eyes, not hesitating for a single fraction of a second. "They are not my family, detective. They are criminals who tried to destroy my future. I want the maximum charges filed against every single person involved. Proceed with the official report." Vance nodded slowly. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. For the next hour, we sat in that cramped office while I provided a formal sworn statement. I detailed the stolen documents and every interaction I had with Wells Fargo. Finally, Vance printed out a thick stack of paper. He stamped the front page with a heavy red seal and signed his name at the bottom. He handed me a certified copy of the complete police report. "This is your shield, Ms. Hayes," he said. "With this report, the credit bureaus are legally required to remove the fraudulent account from your history. Wells Fargo cannot hold you liable for the debt. We will begin drafting the arrest warrants." I took the stamped police report, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the paper in my hands. This was not just a document. It was a loaded weapon. I thanked Detective Vance, placed the report into my briefcase, and walked out of the precinct. The federal machine was officially turned on. The trap was locked. Now, it was time to claim my prize. I stepped off the concrete stairs of the police precinct and immediately hailed a passing taxi. The certified police report inside my heavy briefcase felt like a solid block of gold. I had secured my absolute criminal defense against the bank. Now I needed an aggressive offensive strategy to handle the property itself. I gave the driver the address for the law offices of Harrison and Finch, a prestigious real estate litigation firm located in the heart of the downtown legal district. I had called them the previous afternoon from my apartment to secure an emergency consultation, paying their exorbitant retainer fee without a single second thought. I needed a shark, and their senior partner, Eleanor Finch, had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in complex property disputes. The taxi pulled up to a sleek, modern glass building. I paid the fare, grabbed my briefcase, and rode the silent elevator all the way up to the 40th floor. The polished receptionist ushered me directly into a sprawling corner office overlooking the vast Chicago skyline. Eleanor Finch was a formidable woman in her late 50s, wearing a sharp navy suit and looking entirely devoid of patience for small talk. She gestured to the plush leather chair across from her massive oak desk. "Ms. Hayes," Eleanor said, folding her hands over a yellow legal pad. "Your intake form stated you are dealing with a complex title dispute involving federal fraud. Show me exactly what you have." I opened my briefcase and placed the recorded deed, the Wells Fargo origination documents, and the freshly stamped police report directly in front of her. 3 days ago, my identity was stolen by my brother-in-law, a licensed mortgage broker named Jamal Davis. He bypassed manual underwriting, forged my electronic signatures, and secured a $700,000 loan on a property in Oak Brook. I just filed the federal wire fraud report with the Financial Crimes Unit an hour ago. That is the certified copy. Eleanor picked up the police report first, her sharp eyes scanning the official seals and the detailed detective notes. She then picked up the recorded deed, putting on her reading glasses to examine the fine print. She studied the documents in complete silence for 3 long minutes. The only sound in the large room was the rhythmic ticking of a heavy wall clock. Finally, she lowered her glasses and looked directly at me, a sharp, almost predatory smile forming on her lips. "Your brother-in-law is a spectacularly arrogant fool," Eleanor stated smoothly, leaning back in her chair. "He focused entirely on manipulating the financial system to secure the loan, but he completely ignored the fundamental principles of real estate property law. Look at this deed, Ms. Hayes. Look specifically at the grantee line." I leaned forward, looking at the document. "It says my name, Madeline Hayes." "Exactly," Eleanor replied, tapping the thick paper with her silver pen. "Because his credit score was too abysmal to be included on the mortgage, and because the lender requires the property title to match the primary borrower, the title company recorded this deed exclusively in your name. Jamal Davis and your sister Brittany are not listed anywhere on this legally binding document. They have absolutely no legal claim to this property. In the eyes of the state of Illinois, they are not homeowners. They are nothing more than uninvited guests trespassing inside your house. You are the sole absolute owner of this estate." Salute. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. The trap was even tighter than I had realized. "I own the house," I repeated, letting the magnificent reality settle into my brain. But what about the down payment? My parents secretly provided $100,000 in cash to clear the closing costs. Can they claim equity in the property because they funded the initial transaction? Eleanor laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the office. "Absolutely not. When underwriting a conventional mortgage, any cash provided by a third party for the down payment must be accompanied by a certified gift letter. The underwriter would never have cleared the file without it. That letter legally binds the donor, stating that the money is a gift with zero expectation of repayment or property interest. Jamal had to forge a gift letter to get this approved. So legally speaking, your parents gave you a non-refundable $100,000 gift. They have zero legal standing to file a lien or demand any sort of repayment." The genius of Jamal's own criminality had entirely trapped them. He had meticulously documented their money as a gift to me to appease the bank. My parents had drained their hard-earned retirement accounts to fund a criminal enterprise designed to destroy my life, and they had handed me those funds on a silver platter. The poetic justice of legally seizing their money was almost intoxicating. "So what are my legal options?" I asked, leaning back in the leather chair and crossing my legs. Eleanor clasped her hands tightly together. "You have the ultimate leverage. Since you possess the stamped police report, you can freeze the fraudulent mortgage account, which absolves you of the criminal liability. But because you hold the sole legal deed, you retain the legal right to liquidate the asset. I recommend we immediately hire a real estate agent to list the property for sale. We sell the house, use the proceeds to pay off the $700,000 loan balance to clear the bank, and any remaining equity, including that $100,000 down payment, legally goes directly into your bank account. You get to keep their money as compensatory damages for the emotional distress and identity theft. My mind raced picturing my parents' faces when they realized their golden child's down payment was legally mine. And what about Jamal and Brittany? They are currently living in the house. They have all their furniture moved in. They are unauthorized occupants, Eleanor said coldly, her eyes flashing with litigation excitement. I will draft a formal notice to quit the premises. Normally, residential evictions can take months to process, but because Jamal secured access to the property through documented federal wire fraud, the standard tenant protections do not apply. We can petition the court for an emergency ejectment order based on criminal trespass. The county sheriff will drag them out onto the lawn, but we need to move incredibly fast before they realize their massive legal exposure. I looked at the whiteboard timeline I had built in my head. I do not want them to know we are doing this until I am standing in that house. They are hosting a massive housewarming party this Saturday night. They invited all of our extended family and their friends to show off the property. I want to serve them the absolute reality at that party. Eleanor's predatory smile widened into a genuine grin. A very public execution. I completely support that strategy. I will have the formal ejectment notices and the legal declaration of sole ownership drafted and notarized by Friday afternoon. I will also refer you to a ruthless listing agent who specializes in rapid corporate liquidations. By the time you walk into that party on Saturday, you will possess the paperwork to legally tear their entire world apart. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my checkbook. I wrote a check for the rest of her retainer fee and slid it across the mahogany desk. Have the documents ready by Friday, Eleanor. I am going to sell my new house. I walked out of the law office and stepped back onto the bustling Chicago streets. The bright sun was shining against the glass skyscrapers. I had the police report. I had the absolute legal ownership of the property. I had the clear path to seize their $100,000 down payment. Jamal thought he was a criminal mastermind, but he was just a desperate man who had unwittingly handed me the keys to his own destruction. The trap was fully loaded. Now I just needed to prepare for the party. Wednesday morning arrived with a torrential downpour washing the Chicago streets completely clean. I sat in a private conference room at a high-end real estate brokerage in the Gold Coast district. Eleanor Finch had explicitly recommended Marcus Sterling. He was not a traditional family home realtor. He was a corporate liquidator, a man who specialized in selling distressed luxury assets during hostile divorces and messy corporate bankruptcies. Marcus sat across the glass table, meticulously reviewing the certified deed and Eleanor's legal memorandum. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his demeanor radiating an intense and calculating professional energy. He looked up from the documents, a sharp grin spreading across his face. So you legally own a $700,000 property in Oak Brook, completely unencumbered by any legitimate spousal or tenant claims, and the current occupants are entirely unaware that you hold the legal deed. I took a slow sip of the black coffee his assistant had provided earlier. That is absolutely correct. They believe they own the house. They believe I am simply the financial sponsor. I need to list this property immediately, and I need an aggressive buyer who will not be deterred by evictions. Marcus pulled a thick listing agreement from his leather folio and slid it across the glass table. Consider it successfully done. I have a private network of cash investors who specialize in acquiring luxury properties well below normal market value. They do not care about interior decorations or the emotional state of current occupants. They strictly care about the legal transfer of the deed. Because we are dealing with hostile occupants, we will list the property strictly as a private sale. No open houses, no public listing photos. I will present the property directly to my private investment group today. I picked up a sleek silver pen from the table. What is the timeline for this transaction? If you sign this exclusive listing agreement today, I will have a legitimate cash offer on your desk by Monday morning, Marcus replied, his tone entirely devoid of hesitation. We will schedule a closed closing process, completely bypassing the standard 30-day escrow period. Once the title clears and the funds are wired into your account, the new corporate owner assumes full responsibility for removing the unauthorized occupants if the county sheriff has not already removed them. It becomes their legal problem entirely. I read through the contract carefully, verifying his standard commission rate and the specific clauses regarding the hostile occupants. The terms were completely acceptable. I signed my name precisely on the bottom line, officially authorizing the rapid sale of the house Jamal had stolen my identity to purchase. I slid the signed document back to Marcus. "Sell it," I said. Thursday evening, I sat at the large mahogany desk in my home office. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy silence over the city. I booted up my secure laptop and navigated directly to the federal licensing portal online. This website was the nationwide multi-state licensing system. It served as the central regulatory database for the entire financial sector. Every single mortgage broker, loan officer, and financial advisor operating legally within the United States was registered and continuously monitored through this strict system. Jamal held a highly coveted federal brokerage license. It was the absolute foundation of his professional career, his sole source of legitimate income, and his primary source of arrogant pride. I clicked the bright red button labeled File a Consumer Complaint. The portal immediately opened a highly secure encrypted form. I started typing without hesitation whatsoever. I was a user experience director. I knew exactly how to format data to trigger an immediate and catastrophic systemic response. I systematically outlined his severe violations. First, violation of the Truth in Lending Act by deliberately forging financial disclosures. Second, violation of the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act by submitting fraudulent down payment gift letters to a federally insured banking institution. Third, direct commission of felony wire fraud by transmitting forged electronic signatures across state lines. I detailed the specific dates of the data theft. I meticulously entered the exact internet protocol addresses and the fake email domains used. The compliance investigators monitoring this system did not care about family drama or emotional excuses. They cared exclusively about regulatory integrity and federal law. I attached a compressed digital file containing the certified police report, the recorded audio confession, and the fraudulent Wells Fargo origination logs. I reviewed the final complaint on my screen. It was an absolute masterpiece of corporate destruction. The exact moment I hit submit, the automated system would immediately flag Jamal's unique identification number. The National Regulatory Board would issue a mandatory suspension of his license pending a formal federal investigation by the Justice Department authorities. He would be instantly locked out of every banking portal in the country. He would not be legally able to originate a single loan check, a client's credit score, or collect a single commission check ever again. His entire professional existence would be completely eradicated before he even woke up on Friday morning. I clicked Submit. The screen flashed bright green, confirming the permanent upload of the catastrophic evidence. Friday afternoon arrived with surgical precision. A specialized courier delivered a heavy manila envelope directly to my office desk. I sliced the top open and extracted the freshly drafted legal documents. Eleanor Finch had delivered perfectly. The heavy legal paper felt magnificent. It contained the formal declaration of absolute property ownership and the notarized notice to quit the premises, citing emergency criminal ejectment. I placed the documents carefully into my leather briefcase, alongside the certified police report. The trap was now fully armed and entirely inescapable. I had systematically dismantled their financial security, their professional licenses, and their physical housing. I looked out the massive glass window of my corporate office, watching the traffic far below. Tomorrow night, I would finally attend their housewarming party and personally deliver their absolute destruction. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity, but my apartment remained perfectly chilled. I stood before my full-length bedroom mirror, methodically assembling my armor. Tonight was not merely another mandatory family gathering. It was an execution, and I intended to look the part. I chose a stunning tailored emerald green sheath dress that hit just below the knee, paired with classic black stiletto pumps. The color was deliberate, projecting absolute wealth and unshakable control. I pulled my dark hair back into a severe, flawless chignon, ensuring not a single strand was out of place. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, emphasizing the sharp angles of my cheekbones, and finishing with a bold blood-red lipstick. I looked completely untouchable and entirely unbreakable. I walked into my home office and picked up my heavy leather briefcase. It contained the certified police report, the notarized declaration of property ownership, the emergency ejectment notices, and the signed corporate listing agreement. I snapped the brass locks shut. The sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet room, sounding exactly like a loaded weapon. I left my apartment, rode the elevator down to the parking garage, and slid into the driver's seat of my car. The drive to Oak Brook took 45 minutes. I navigated the busy Saturday night traffic with complete mechanical detachment. I did not listen to music. I listened only to the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic calculation of my impending victory. I exited the highway and entered the exclusive suburban neighborhood. The streets were wide-lined with towering ancient oak trees and manicured lawns. This was the exact type of neighborhood my sister had always coveted, but had never earned the right to occupy. I followed the navigation system until I reached the correct street. The house was impossible to miss. It was a sprawling two-story brick colonial estate sitting on a massive corner lot. The driveway was entirely jammed with expensive vehicles. My parents had clearly invited their entire country club social circle to witness their ultimate triumph. Warm golden light spilled from every single window, illuminating the expensive landscaping. I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of jazz music and overlapping laughter drifting through the heavy evening air. Jamal and Brittany were playing the perfect hosts, completely oblivious to the legal guillotine hanging directly over their heads. I bypassed the crowded driveway and parked my car firmly against the street curb, directly in front of the brick walkway. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence of my cabin for exactly 60 seconds. I looked at the magnificent structure standing before me. The imposing columns, the pristine roof, the expansive front porch. According to the state of Illinois and the federal government, I owned every single brick, every pane of glass, and every blade of grass on this property. I picked up my briefcase, opened my car door, and stepped out onto the paved sidewalk. My stilettos clicked loudly against the concrete as I walked up the winding front path. I bypassed the decorative oversized brass knocker and simply grasped the heavy handle of the front door. I did not bother knocking. The door was unlocked, accommodating the constant flow of arriving party guests. I pushed it open and crossed the threshold into the grand foyer. The immediate sensory overload was intense. The air was thick with the smell of expensive catered food, cheap perfume, and spilled champagne. The foyer featured a sweeping mahogany staircase and a massive crystal chandelier that refracted the light into thousands of glittering shards. Dozens of people were packed into the adjoining living and dining rooms, laughing aggressively and clinking highball glasses. I stood silently in the entryway, my hands gripping my briefcase completely unnoticed for the first 30 seconds. I took a slow, deliberate inventory of my property. I analyzed the expensive Persian rugs covering the hardwood floors. I examined the elaborate floral arrangements sitting on the entryway tables. Every single item in this house had been purchased with the assumption of permanent safety. I walked slowly past the coat closet, running my free hand lightly along the smooth, freshly painted walls. This was my hallway. I looked up at the high, vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate crown molding. This was my ceiling. I stepped onto the plush, custom-ordered carpet of the main living area. This was my floor. Then the crowd shifted and I spotted them. Jamal was standing near the massive stone fireplace in the center of the living room. He was wearing a custom-tailored gray suit, holding a snifter of brandy, and laughing loudly at a terrible joke told by one of my father's golfing partners. He looked incredibly smug, radiating the false, unearned confidence of a man who believed he had successfully cheated the universe. Beside him stood my younger sister Brittany. She wore a sparkling designer cocktail dress that she absolutely could not afford. She was holding court with a group of female relatives, waving her hands animatedly as she detailed the extensive renovations she planned to make to the kitchen. The kitchen that legally belonged entirely and exclusively to me. My parents, Thomas and Susan, were positioned near the open-concept kitchen island, proudly pouring expensive vintage wine and accepting endless congratulations on their daughter's magnificent new home. They were practically glowing with absolute self-satisfaction, completely validating their reckless decision to fund a major federal crime. They had intentionally stolen my identity, forged my signature, and hijacked my financial future just to throw this specific, lavish party. I felt a cold, terrifying smile slowly stretch across my face. I gripped the heavy handle of my briefcase tighter. I stepped entirely out of the shadows of the foyer and moved directly into the bright center of the crowded living room, projecting a dominating, undeniable aura that commanded immediate attention. I was finally ready to begin the ultimate demolition. The immediate silence that fell over the living room was palpable. It started near the grand foyer and rippled outward through the crowd like a physical shockwave. Intimate conversations abruptly died. The cheerful clinking of crystal champagne glasses ceased entirely. One by one, the wealthy party guests turned their heads to look at the woman in the emerald green dress standing fiercely in the center of the room. I did not break my stride. I locked my eyes entirely on Jamal. The arrogant, triumphant smile on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden terrifying pale realization. He bumped the heavy stone fireplace with his shoulder as he instinctively took a clumsy step backward. Brittany noticed his sudden movement and followed his terrified gaze. Her jaw dropped slightly, her manicured hand flying to the base of her throat in genuine shock. Before I could utter a single syllable, my parents intercepted me. They moved with a desperate synchronized speed, born entirely of intense social panic. My father reached me first. His large, heavy hand clamped down hard on my left bicep, his thick fingers digging painfully into my skin through the expensive fabric of my dress. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of expensive scotch and burning cigars. "Not here," he hissed, his voice a lethal vibrating whisper designed to crush my rebellion. "You will not make a scene in front of my friends." My mother materialized instantly on my right side. She plastered a sickeningly sweet, entirely false smile on her face for the benefit of the staring guests. "Madeline, darling." "What a wonderful surprise," she announced loudly, her voice dripping with artificial cloying warmth. "We were just about to open the vintage wine in the study. Come with us right now." I allowed them to physically maneuver me. I wanted them in a confined space. I wanted the trap fully enclosed before I sprang it. They marched me aggressively down the polished hardwood hallway, away from the glittering chandelier and the curious eyes of the country club elite. Jamal and Brittany abandoned their posts at the fireplace and hurried after us like obedient, terrified dogs. We reached the heavy oak door at the extreme end of the hallway. My father shoved me roughly inside the private study. Jamal followed instantly, slamming the door shut behind us and aggressively throwing the heavy deadbolt lock. The study was a dark, masculine room filled with towering, built-in bookshelves and a massive mahogany desk. It smelled strongly of new leather and fresh paint. The faint, lively sounds of the party became entirely muffled, isolating the five of us in a tense, airless box. The fake smiles vanished instantly. The masks dropped to the floor. The ambush began. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jamal barked, his voice cracking slightly with unmanaged panic. "You explicitly said you were staying in the city. You cannot just show up here looking like a corporate assassin and deliberately freak everybody out." Brittany crossed her arms tightly over her sparkling cocktail dress, her face contorting into a vicious, childish scowl. "You are completely unbelievable, Madeline. This is my absolute dream house. This is my one special night to shine, and you are deliberately trying to sabotage it because you are miserable and alone. You could not just let me have one single victory in my life. I stood completely motionless in the center of the study. I did not rub the sore spot on my arm where my father had grabbed me. I did not respond to my sister's pathetic whining. I simply watched them rapidly unravel. My father stepped forward, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at my face. I am going to make this incredibly simple for you, Madeline. You are going to put that ridiculous briefcase down. You are going to walk back out into that living room. You are going to smile, mingle, and tell everyone how proud you are of your sister and her husband. If you breathe a single word about the mortgage, I will personally ruin you. I will tell everyone at the club that you are a jealous, unhinged spinster trying to steal your sister's joy. Susan moved to stand next to her husband, nodding in aggressive agreement. Your father is completely right. You are acting incredibly hysterical over a simple piece of paperwork. Jamal just borrowed your name for a few weeks until his commission checks clear. Nobody actually got hurt. You are not actually paying for this house. You need to stop being such a dramatic, vindictive bitch and accept that your family needed a small favor. A small favor, I repeated. The sound of my own voice was incredibly calm, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Yes, a massive favor, Jamal snapped, stepping closer and trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. I handled all the complicated underwriting. I did all the heavy lifting. All you did was lend your pristine credit score to the transaction. You should be thanking me for expanding your real estate portfolio. Now put the damn briefcase away and go pretend to be a supportive sister before I completely lose my temper. The sheer breathtaking delusion of his statement hung heavily in the air. They actually believed they still held the absolute power in this dynamic. They fully believed that because there were four of them and only one of me, they could simply bully me into submission using the same tired tactics they had employed since my childhood. They thought my total silence over the past 3 days was a desperate sign of surrender. They thought I had come here to negotiate a quiet peace treaty. I slowly walked over to the massive mahogany desk. It was completely empty, a pristine surface waiting to be utilized. I placed my heavy leather briefcase squarely in the center of the dark wood. The solid thud echoed loudly against the paneled walls. I kept my hands resting lightly on the brass locks. I looked up and made deliberate, icy eye contact with every single person in the room. First my mother, then my father, then my sister, and finally Jamal. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply let the heavy silence stretch and compound until the physical tension in the small room became incredibly unbearable. The air grew thick and stale. I watched the false liquor-fueled bravado slowly drain from Jamal's dark eyes, quickly replaced by a creeping primal instinct that finally told him he was standing in a locked room with an apex predator. He looked down at the briefcase. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I am not here to mingle, I said, my voice echoing with terrifying, absolute authority. I am not here to smile for your wealthy friends, and I am certainly not here to keep your pathetic criminal secrets. I unclasped the first brass lock on the briefcase. The sharp metallic crack snapped through the silent study like a gunshot. I unclasped the second lock. I am here to evict you from my house. I pushed the lid of the briefcase completely open. The crisp interior smelled faintly of dry leather and fresh printer ink. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The word evict hung in the stale air of the study, completely short-circuiting their arrogant brains. Brittany was the first to physically react. She let out a sharp, condescending bark of laughter, though her eyes remained wide with sudden frantic uncertainty. "Evict us," she mocked, her voice trembling slightly. "You cannot evict us, Madeline. This is our house. Jamal just let you sign the paperwork. You do not own anything." I ignored her completely. My eyes were locked entirely on Jamal. I reached into the briefcase and retrieved the thick stack of papers sitting on the very top. It was the certified police report I had obtained from Detective Vance on Tuesday morning. The bright red official seal of the Financial Crimes Division was stamped aggressively on the front page, an undeniable marker of federal authority. I placed my hand flat on the document and slowly slid it across the smooth mahogany surface of the desk until it stopped precisely inches from Jamal's hands. "Read it," I commanded, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Jamal stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. He did not want to touch it. He could see the bold black letters printed at the top of the page. Chicago Police Department, Financial Crimes Division, Sworn Criminal Complaint. His arrogant posture evaporated entirely. His shoulders slumped and a sickening pallor washed over his face, turning his complexion a terrifying shade of gray. "Pick it up and read it, Jamal," I said, leaning slightly forward. "Or should I read it aloud for the entire family?" Jamal reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the report. His eyes began to dart frantically across the pages, absorbing the clinical, devastating language of his own destruction. He read the exact dates he accessed my credit file. He read the internet protocol addresses traced directly to his commercial brokerage office. He read the transcript of the audio confession he had freely given me on the phone. A bead of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. "This is a joke," my father declared loudly, stepping aggressively toward the desk. He reached for the paper, but Jamal yanked it away, holding it desperately against his chest. "It is not a joke, Thomas," I said smoothly. "It is a sworn federal affidavit." On Tuesday morning, I sat in a windowless interrogation room with a seasoned detective and handed over the complete origination file from Wells Fargo. I provided them with the forged electronic signature logs. I provided them with the fake email domain he created using my name. And I provided them with the flash drive containing his arrogant, rambling confession. Jamal's chest was heaving. He looked up from the paper, his eyes completely hollowed out by absolute terror. "You went to the cops," he whispered, his voice cracking violently. "You actually went to the cops. I told you I was going to pay the mortgage. I told you we were family." I shook my head slowly, feeling an immense, intoxicating wave of power wash over me. "You are not family. You are a parasite." By transmitting forged financial documents to a federally insured banking institution, you did not just commit standard identity theft. You committed federal wire fraud. The detective immediately forwarded that report to the state attorney general. "There are active arrest warrants currently being drafted for your immediate apprehension." Susan let out a strangled gasp, grabbing the edge of the leather sofa for physical support. "Arrest warrants," she shrieked. "Madeline, you stop this right now. You call them and tell them you made a mistake. You tell them you gave him permission." I turned my icy gaze to my mother. "It does not work that way, Susan. You cannot simply cancel a federal investigation because it ruins your dinner party. The banking system is the victim here, and the federal government is extremely protective of its insured institutions. Furthermore, I already submitted the certified police report to the nationwide multi-state licensing system. I filed an emergency consumer complaint detailing his deliberate violations of the Truth in Lending Act and the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act." Jamal dropped the police report onto the floor. His legs seemed to completely lose their structural integrity. He collapsed backward into one of the heavy leather chairs, staring blankly at the wall. "My license?" He choked out, his hands shaking violently in his lap. "My federal brokerage license. It is permanently revoked." I confirmed, delivering the absolute finality of the blow. "The automated system flagged your unique identification number the moment I submitted the evidence. You have been completely locked out of every financial portal in the country. You cannot originate loans. You cannot access client files. Your career in the financial sector is entirely eradicated. By Monday morning, your brokerage firm will terminate you to avoid federal complicity." Brittany lunged forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You malicious bitch," she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You destroyed my husband over a stupid signature. We are living here. This is our home. How could you do this to us?" My father slammed his fist violently onto the mahogany desk. "I will hire the best defense attorneys in the state." He roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. I will drain every single account I have to keep him out of prison, and I will personally sue you for malicious prosecution. You will not get away with destroying this family, Madeline." I watched my father rage, entirely unimpressed by his hollow threats. "You cannot ever hire a defense attorney." "Thomas," I stated very calmly, "you simply do not have the necessary financial resources available to you anymore. Because you recklessly gave away your entire retirement savings to secretly fund his massive, fraudulent, and undeniable criminal enterprise." My father froze, his mouth hanging open in a silent, grotesque caricature of shock. He had arrogantly assumed his financial contribution to this crime was completely untraceable, a secret pact made between a desperate father and a manipulative son-in-law. He looked at Susan, whose face had completely lost its artificial elasticity. The realization that I knew about their $100,000 fraudulent gift entirely paralyzed them. But I was not finished. I dismissed my parents from my immediate focus and turned my attention back to the shattered man sitting in the leather chair. I reached into my heavy briefcase for the second time. Jamal watched my hand disappear into the dark leather interior with wide, unblinking eyes. He was hyperventilating, his chest rising and falling in rapid bursts. He had already absorbed the reality of the police report, but his arrogant brain was desperately trying to calculate a way out, a backdoor negotiation. I pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper and placed it delicately next to the police report on the mahogany desk. It was a printed screenshot. The header displayed the official logo of the nationwide multi-state licensing system. Below the logo was his full legal name, his unique federal identifier number, and a bold red banner that read "Emergency Suspension Pending Investigation." "This is the receipt I received yesterday evening," I explained, tapping my manicured index finger directly on the red banner. "I know you heard me mention the NMLS a moment ago, but I need you to truly comprehend the absolute finality of this document. I logged directly into the federal portal, using my verified credentials. I uploaded the forged Wells Fargo origination documents. I uploaded the fake digital signature certificates. I uploaded the pristine audio file of you explicitly confessing to financial fraud. The automated regulatory algorithms instantly flagged your file. By the time you woke up this morning to prepare for this lavish party, your federal brokerage license was already completely dead." Jamal leaned forward, his shaking hands gripping his knees. He stared at the piece of paper, frantically reading the specific regulatory codes I had cited. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in a pathetic motion. "No, you cannot do this. You cannot touch my license. I have 20 pending files in my active pipeline. I have innocent families closing on their homes next week. I have over $50,000 in pending commissions clearing on Monday morning. If I am locked out of the origination portal, those loans die. You are ruining innocent lives." "They are already dead, Jamal," I stated, with absolute surgical precision. "You are completely locked out of Encompass. You are completely locked out of the Calix software system. If you try to log into your brokerage portal right now, you will find your credentials have been permanently revoked by the Corporate Compliance Department. When the federal system flagged your license for active wire fraud, it sent an immediate automated alert to the primary compliance officer at your firm. They are legally obligated to freeze every single file associated with your identification number. You have no pending commissions. The money you thought you were getting on Monday is being held in a frozen escrow account pending a massive federal audit." Brittany let out a sharp, jagged sob. She fell to her knees beside Jamal's chair, grabbing his arm. "Tell me she is lying." "Jamal?" She pleaded, her voice entirely stripped of its former venom. "Tell me you still have your job. How are we going to pay for this house? How are we going to afford the cars?" Jamal did not look at her. He could not look at her. He just stared at the red banner on the printed screenshot. He was a man who defined his entire existence by his ability to close a deal. I had just walked into his absolute sanctuary and professionally executed him in front of his wife. "I will give you the house," Jamal suddenly blurted out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. He looked up at me, tears freely streaming down his face, completely abandoning any remaining shred of masculine dignity. "I will sign a quitclaim deed right now. We will pack all of our things tonight. You can have the property. You can have the $100,000 your parents put down. Just call the board, call the NMLS, and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. Please, Madeline, I cannot work in finance ever again. I will be completely ruined. I stood tall, looking down at the weeping, broken man and my pathetic, trembling sister. The sheer audacity of his request was magnificent. You still fundamentally misunderstand the mechanics of the machine you activated, Jamal. The nationwide multi-state licensing system is not a customer service department. It is a strict federal regulatory body. You cannot simply retract a complaint of this magnitude once the physical evidence of forgery has been verified. The button has been pressed. The system is executing its automated protocol. You are permanently unemployable in any sector that handles secured finances. On Monday morning, your firm will officially terminate your employment. On Tuesday, they will seize your corporate assets and turn them over to the federal authorities. The heavy silence in the study returned, completely suffocating the four of them. The faint rhythmic bass of the jazz music from the crowded living room thumped against the heavy oak door, a sharp contrast to the absolute devastation occurring inside this room. My father had backed away, leaning heavily against the built-in bookshelves, clutching his chest, as the grim reality of his permanently lost retirement savings finally took hold. Susan was weeping silently into her hands. Jamal and Brittany were huddled together, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic destruction of their financial future. The career execution was flawlessly complete. But I was still not finished. I had one final legal document remaining inside my leather briefcase. I reached into the dark, crisp interior of my leather briefcase for the third and final time. I withdrew the thick stack of legal documents and placed them squarely on the mahogany desk right next to the damning police report and the federal license suspension notice. She pointed a trembling finger at the new stack of papers. "What else could you possibly have?" she shrieked, her voice echoing painfully in the confined space. "You cannot take this house, Madeline. We put $100,000 down on this property. Mom and Dad gave us their retirement money. We have equity. You cannot just kick us out of a house we paid for." I looked at my younger sister, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical fascination at her profound ignorance. "This is the official recorded property deed, Brittany. I want you to step forward and read the name printed on the grantee line." She hesitated, glancing frantically at our mother for support. Brittany took a hesitant step forward. She leaned over the desk, her eyes scanning the dense legal text until she found the highlighted section. "It just says your name," she whispered, the fight suddenly draining from her voice. "It says Madeline Hayes. Where is Jamal? Where is my name?" "You are not on the deed," I explained, delivering the words with the slow, deliberate cadence of a teacher instructing a remarkably slow child. Because Jamal's credit score was entirely toxic, the title company legally recorded this property exclusively in the name of the approved borrower. That is me. You are simply unauthorized occupants squatting in my luxury real estate. My father pushed himself off the bookshelf, his face flushed with renewed desperate anger. "That is a technicality," he bellowed, slamming his fist against the wood paneling. "We provided the $100,000 down payment. That money secures their equity in this property, and a judge will see exactly what you are trying to do." I turned to face my father, an icy smile finally breaking across my face. "You really do not understand the magnificent trap your son-in-law built, Thomas. When you provide a massive cash down payment for a conventional mortgage underwritten by a federal bank, you are legally required to submit a certified gift letter. That letter explicitly states that the money is a pure gift to the primary borrower with absolutely zero expectation of repayment or ownership interest." The color drained entirely from my father's face. "Jamal forged that exact gift letter," I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable triumph. "He legally documented your life savings as a non-refundable $100,000 financial gift given directly to me. You have zero legal standing to claim equity. You willingly handed over your entire retirement fund to a criminal and he legally registered it as a personal donation to my bank account. Brittany let out an ear-piercing scream. She lunged toward the desk, violently grabbing the stack of papers. She started ripping the heavy paper into jagged shreds, throwing the pieces into the air. "You cannot have it!" she sobbed hysterically, her carefully constructed facade completely shattering into a million pieces. "It is my money. It is my house. You are a monster." I watched the shredded paper flutter to the hardwood floor, completely unmoved by her violent display. "Those are just copies, Brittany," I stated plainly. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out a sleek silver-embossed folder. I opened it and laid it flat on the mahogany desk. "I hired a ruthless corporate liquidator named Marcus Sterling yesterday morning. This document is a fully executed exclusive listing agreement. I have officially placed this property on the private market. Marcus is currently shopping this house to a network of aggressive cash investors who specialize in rapid acquisitions." Jamal lifted his head from his hands, his eyes bloodshot and completely wild. "You are selling the house." He choked out his voice a ragged whisper. "I am selling the house," I confirmed, locking my eyes with his. "The new corporate buyer will bypass the standard 30-day escrow. They will wire the funds directly into my accounts by next Friday. I will use those proceeds to completely pay off the $700,000 fraudulent loan balance at Wells Fargo, entirely clearing my name from your criminal debt." "And the $100,000 down payment?" my father asked, his voice shaking with absolute terror. I smiled, letting my strategies sink into their arrogant bones. "I am keeping your retirement savings as compensatory damages for the severe emotional distress, the identity theft, and the massive legal fees I had to incur to clean up your mess. It is the price of your betrayal." Susan finally broke her catatonic silence. She let out a horrific guttural wail, sliding down the leather sofa until she collapsed entirely onto the floor. She curled into a tight fetal position, clutching her stomach as she wept for her lost wealth and her destroyed golden child. My father stumbled backward, his legs giving out. He fell heavily into one of the leather armchairs, his hands gripping his chest as he stared into the dark, empty fireplace. He was completely broken, a pathetic shell of the demanding, entitled patriarch who had commanded my obedience for 33 years. I looked at the ruined family, entirely crushed by the absolute weight of their own actions. I picked up my leather briefcase and snapped the brass lock shut. The sharp metallic click echoed like a final gavel strike. "I have also filed an emergency ejectment order," I announced, turning toward the heavy oak door. "The county sheriff will arrive on Monday morning to physically remove you from my property. I suggest you spend the rest of your lovely party packing your bags." I pushed the heavy oak door completely open, stepping back into the bright light, and walked away from them forever. I had barely taken 3 steps into the brightly lit hallway when I heard the heavy oak door wrench open behind me. The lively sounds of the jazz trio and the cheerful clinking of champagne glasses from the living room washed over me. But those festive noises were instantly pierced by the sound of my father's frantic, heavy footsteps. "Madeline, wait." He gasped, his voice entirely devoid of its usual booming, arrogant authority. It was a pathetic, ragged wheeze. I stopped on the expensive Persian runner, but I did not immediately turn around. I simply waited, letting him close the physical distance. He grabbed my shoulder. His grip was not the commanding, painful grasp he had used earlier when he dragged me into the study. It was weak, trembling, and entirely desperate. "Please," he begged, the words sounding completely foreign and metallic on his tongue. "Step back inside, just for 1 single minute. I need you to understand exactly what you are doing." I slowly turned my head. My father was physically deteriorating right before my eyes. The flushed purple rage that had dominated his features moments ago had vanished entirely, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. Heavy sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes were wide with a terror so profound it bordered on complete madness. Behind him, Susan emerged from the shadows of the study. She was no longer the perfectly composed country club matriarch, hosting the social event of the season. Her expensive makeup was heavily smeared with tears, and she held her cashmere cardigan tightly around her shivering frame. I stepped back over the threshold, pulling the heavy door almost shut to block out the oblivious party guests, but leaving a small crack so the stifling air could escape. "I am not negotiating, Thomas," I said, crossing my arms defensively over my chest. "The documents are officially filed. The house is currently being sold. You have absolutely no leverage left." "You do not understand the math," Susan sobbed, pushing past my father to stand directly in front of me. She reached out desperately, attempting to grab my hands, but I stepped back quickly, completely rejecting her physical contact. She let her hands drop uselessly to her sides, her shoulders heaving with violent sobs. "That $100,000, she wept, her voice cracking painfully. "It was not extra cash. It was everything, Madeline. It was absolutely everything we had left in the entire world." I raised a single eyebrow, my analytical brain rapidly processing this new catastrophic data point. "Explain yourself," I commanded coldly. My father leaned heavily against the wooden doorframe, looking exactly like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the floor to drop. He stared at the hardwood floor, entirely unable to meet my eyes. When Jamal came to us with the loan approval problem, he swore he just needed a temporary cash injection to clear the massive closing costs. He promised us he would refinance the mortgage in 6 months and pay us back with a massive interest bonus. But we did not have $100,000 in liquid savings. I have been secretly covering Brittany's rent for the past 4 years, because Jamal's commissions barely covered their luxury car payments. We were already drowning in debt. He took a ragged, shuddering breath, the humiliating financial truth finally spilling from his lips. "I liquidated my entire retirement portfolio, Madeline. I cashed out the federal 401k, I took the massive early withdrawal penalties and paid the exorbitant capital gains taxes. And even after completely draining the accounts, that was still not enough cash. To get the rest of the money, I took out a massive second mortgage on our own house. We leveraged our entire existence to give them that down payment." The sheer magnitude of their financial recklessness left me momentarily speechless. I looked back and forth between the two of them, absorbing the absolute insanity of their actions. "You liquidated your entire retirement and secretly mortgaged your own home," I repeated, ensuring I fully understood the depths of their stupidity. "You destroyed your own financial security to fund a federal wire fraud scheme. Why would you ever do something so incredibly reckless?" Susan let out a jagged, horrifying wail. "Because she is your younger sister," she cried out, her face twisting in pure agony. "Because she was failing. You were succeeding. You have the massive corporate salary, the beautiful apartment downtown, the pristine credit score. You never needed us. You were entirely independent from the day you left for college. But Brittany needed us desperately. She was so unhappy in that tiny apartment. She was so jealous of your perfect life. We just wanted her to have a beautiful home. We thought Jamal was telling the absolute truth. We thought we were just helping our little girl." The profound toxicity of their parental dynamic was finally laid completely bare. They had not just enabled my sister. They had actively sacrificed themselves and attempted to sacrifice me entirely to maintain the false illusion of Brittany's success. "You actively resented my independence," I realized aloud, the final puzzle piece clicking firmly into place. "You punished me for being a responsible adult. You saw my pristine financial standing not as an accomplishment to be celebrated, but as an exploitable resource to be harvested for your favorite child. And when I did not voluntarily hand my future over, you decided it was perfectly acceptable to help a criminal steal it." "Madeline, please," my father begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelids and tracking down his pale cheeks. "If you keep that $100,000, we are completely ruined. The second mortgage payments begin next month. Without our retirement income to cover the massive interest rate, the bank will foreclose on our house within 90 days. We are 65 years old. We will be completely destitute. We will be out on the street. You are our daughter. You cannot legally leave your own parents homeless." I looked at the two people who had brought me into this world. I searched my heart for even a microscopic fraction of empathy, a tiny spark of familial obligation. There was absolutely nothing. The void they had created through 33 years of neglect and financial exploitation was entirely empty. I can, I whispered, my voice carrying the lethal, unforgiving chill of a winter storm. And I absolutely will. Susan collapsed against the wall, her legs completely giving out. She slid down the expensive wood paneling until she hit the floor, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. My father simply stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. "You made a deliberate choice, Thomas," I said softly. "You legally signed that money away to destroy my life. You gambled your own home to steal mine. You lost." I stepped back out into the bright hallway, leaving them huddled on the floor. I did not look back. The heavy oak door of the study did not close completely behind me. It rebounded slightly on its expensive brass hinges, leaving a gap just wide enough to broadcast the impending implosion to the rest of the house. I walked slowly toward the grand foyer, my heels clicking methodically against the imported marble tiles. I had every intention of walking straight out the front door, but the sheer immediate volume of the ensuing explosion forced me to pause beside the sweeping staircase. The toxic ecosystem they had built and maintained for decades was finally collapsing under its own corrupted weight. Inside the study, the stunned silence abruptly shattered. Brittany was the first to speak, her voice completely stripped of its usual whining entitlement. It was a feral, visceral screech of pure, unadulterated rage. She had finally processed the fact that Jamal's arrogance had destroyed her luxury lifestyle. "You lied to me!" she screamed, the sound echoing violently off the vaulted ceilings. "You told me you had the mortgage handled. You told me my parents providing the money was just a temporary bridge loan. You stupid, incompetent loser. You ruined everything. My friends are in the living room right now drinking imported champagne, and you are telling me I am going to be evicted by the police." Jamal fired back instantly, his own panic morphing into a vicious defensive cruelty. "I did it for you, you ungrateful parasite," he roared, his voice cracking with immense strain. "You just had to have the Oakbrook zip code. You just had to have the custom marble countertops and the imported Italian tile. You spend money faster than I can possibly print it. And when I finally figure out a way to get you the massive castle you demanded, you call me a loser. I risked federal prison to keep you from throwing another one of your pathetic tantrums." I heard the distinct, sharp sound of a heavy glass object shattering against the wood paneling. Someone had hurled a whiskey tumbler across the room. The smooth jazz trio playing in the living room abruptly stopped in the middle of a measure. The cheerful, arrogant chatter of the 60-party guests died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, incredibly awkward silence. Every single person in the house was now frozen, listening intently to the graphic destruction of the Hayes family. Thomas suddenly erupted, his booming voice cutting through Jamal and Brittany's vicious crossfire. The horrifying realization that he was facing actual immediate homelessness broke his lifelong habit of shielding his youngest daughter from all consequences. "Shut your mouth, Brittany!" my father bellowed, his tone raw and desperately gravelly. "He did this for you, but you let him take our money. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew we did not have $100,000 in liquid cash lying around. You knew I had to leverage the house to get you that money." Brittany did not back down. Instead, her profound toxic selfishness flared even higher, completely blinding her to her parents' catastrophic sacrifice. "I did not ask you to take out a massive second mortgage," she shrieked defensively, her voice echoing into the silent hallway. "That was your choice. You are the parents. You are supposed to provide for me. It is not my fault you made a stupid financial decision to help Jamal. What am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to live? I cannot go back to a tiny apartment." That was the absolute breaking point for Susan. The mother who had sacrificed her own financial security, alienated her eldest daughter, and mortgaged her entire future for her golden child, finally saw the monster she had meticulously created. "Provide for you," Susan wailed, her voice trembling with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound sorrow. "You are 30 years old. We bought your luxury cars. We paid your exorbitant rent for 4 years. We ruined our entire lives to buy you this massive house, and you do not even care that your father and I are going to be living on the street. You only care about yourself. You have always only cared about yourself. The shouting escalated into an unintelligible, deafening roar of mutual hatred and desperate recrimination. Jamal was screaming at Thomas about impossible, suffocating expectations. Thomas was screaming at Jamal about ruined credit and federal prison sentences. Brittany and Susan were locked in a vicious, tearful screaming match about gratitude, financial betrayal, and ruined lives. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect, affluent suburban family was being violently torn to absolute shreds. They were tearing each other apart, like starving animals trapped in a locked cage, each desperately trying to blame the other for the catastrophic trap they had willingly walked into. I stood perfectly still by the front door, smoothly slipping my arms into my tailored trench coat. Several affluent party guests had spilled out of the massive living room and into the grand foyer to investigate the commotion. They were standing in frozen shock, holding their expensive crystal champagne flutes, their eyes wide as they listened to the horrific verbal abuse echoing down the hallway from the study. A woman wearing a sparkling designer cocktail dress looked directly at me, her expression a complex mixture of profound horror, desperate confusion, and extreme social mortification. "The housewarming party is officially over," I announced to the paralyzed crowd, my voice calm, clinical, and projecting clearly over the violent screaming match occurring down the hall. "The hosts are currently dealing with a massive federal criminal investigation and an impending police-enforced eviction. I strongly suggest you all locate your coats and exit the premises immediately before the county sheriff arrives to secure the property." The guests began to panic. The paralyzing shock broke, and the foyer erupted into furious, hushed murmurs. Wealthy socialites rushed toward the coat check room, aggressively pushing past one another, desperate to escape the blast radius of the massive impending scandal. Nobody wanted to be associated with federal wire fraud. Nobody wanted to be a witness when the authorities inevitably arrived. I turned my back on the absolute chaos I had engineered. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle of the mahogany front door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air. The sprawling circular driveway was packed with expensive luxury vehicles. The grand illuminated brick facade of the $700,000 Oak Brook property loomed behind me, a monument to their incredible greed and my absolute vengeance. I walked steadily down the sweeping brick pathway toward my waiting car. I unlocked the doors with a sharp electronic chirp of the key fob. I slid into the driver's seat, the quiet luxury of the dark leather interior, instantly insulating me from the madness occurring inside the house. I pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life with a smooth, powerful hum. I sat there for one brief moment, staring out the windshield at the beautifully manicured lawn. The headlights swept across the landscaping as I pulled out of the driveway and onto the quiet, dark suburban street. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel any lingering remorse. I felt entirely, undeniably free. The heavy, suffocating chain that had tied me to their toxic demands for over 3 decades was finally broken. The air inside the car felt lighter. The future was entirely mine to control, completely unburdened by their endless financial manipulation. I shifted the car into drive, pressed the accelerator, and drove away into the night, leaving the burning wreckage of my family completely in the rearview mirror. Exactly 7 days later, the crisp Friday morning air was shattered by the sharp, authoritative chirp of a police siren. I parked my car neatly by the curb, directly behind 2 massive, heavily marked county sheriff SUVs. The flashing red and blue lights painted the pristine brick facade of the Oak Brook property in alternating strokes of undeniable legal reality. I stepped out onto the damp pavement, buttoning my tailored charcoal wool coat against the early morning chill. Marcus Sterling, the corporate liquidator I had hired, stood perfectly straight by the edge of the driveway, holding a brushed steel clipboard, and flanked by a small army of professional movers and interior staging specialists. "Are we ready to secure the asset?" Marcus asked, his tone brisk and entirely devoid of sentimentality. He tapped a sleek silver pen against his clipboard, his eyes already calculating the most efficient path for his crew to enter. "We are," I replied smoothly, walking past him to meet the lead deputy at the front door. Deputy Miller was a towering, broad-shouldered man who looked exactly like someone who had absolutely zero patience for suburban entitlement. He held the judge-approved emergency ejectment order securely fastened to a heavy aluminum clipboard. Ms. Hayes, the deputy acknowledged with a curt nod, his expression deadly serious. We knocked 3 times. We can clearly hear movement inside, but they are deliberately refusing to answer the door. Do I have your explicit permission to breach the primary entryway? You do, I confirmed, stepping back a few paces to give him the necessary physical clearance. Deputy Miller did not hesitate for a single second. He raised a heavy tactical boot and kicked the mahogany door squarely directly beside the deadbolt. The expensive locking mechanism shattered instantly with a loud, violent wooden crack. The heavy door flew open, rebounding hard against the interior wall and exposing the massive sunlit foyer. Sheriff's Department! Miller bellowed, his voice booming like thunder through the grand space. Make yourselves known immediately. Walk toward the sound of my voice with your hands completely visible. I followed the deputies into the house. The grand foyer, which had been perfectly spotless during the disastrous housewarming party exactly 1 week ago, was now an absolute disaster zone. Half-packed cardboard boxes were strewn haphazardly across the imported marble tiles. Expensive, brightly colored designer clothing was piled carelessly on the sweeping hardwood staircase. The lingering sour smell of stale wine and unwashed dishes hung heavy in the stagnant air of the house. Jamal appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked absolutely horrific. He was wearing stained gray sweatpants and a wrinkled white t-shirt. He had not shaved in several days, and dark, heavy, exhausted bags hung prominently beneath his bloodshot eyes. He froze completely when he saw the 2 armed deputies standing aggressively in the foyer, his hands gripping the wooden railing with white-knuckled sheer desperation. "What are you doing?" Jamal demanded, his voice cracking with a pathetic mixture of feigned outrage and raw, undeniable terror. "You cannot just break into our house. We need more time. We have not finished packing our things. You are actively trespassing on private property." "Mr. Davis," Deputy Miller stated coldly, his right hand resting casually on his heavy utility belt. The legal grace period for the emergency ejectment order officially expired at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. You have exactly 5 minutes to gather your immediate personal belongings and vacate the premises, or you will be placed in handcuffs and arrested for criminal trespass. Brittany emerged slowly from the master bedroom directly behind Jamal. She looked just as entirely ruined as he did. Her usually pristine, carefully styled blonde hair was tangled in a messy, greasy knot, and her face was heavily puffy and bright red from days of uninterrupted hysterical crying. When she finally looked down and saw me standing calmly behind the deputies, her profound sorrow instantly morphed back into feral, unpredictable rage. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, bounding wildly down the carpeted stairs toward me. "You cannot do this to us, Madeline. The moving truck does not get here until tomorrow afternoon. Where are we supposed to sleep tonight? We do not have anywhere to go. Mom and Dad will not answer our phone calls." "That sounds entirely like a personal logistics problem, Brittany," I replied, my voice cool, even, and completely hollow of empathy. "The county judge signed the final execution order yesterday afternoon. Your legal status as unauthorized squatters has been officially and permanently terminated. I am reclaiming my physical asset." "You malicious bitch," Brittany screamed violently, lunging across the bottom step of the foyer. She did not make it within 10 feet of me. The second deputy intercepted her flawlessly, stepping aggressively into her path and grabbing her violently by the upper arm. He spun her around forcefully, pinning her securely against the wall with absolute terrifying professional efficiency. "Ma'am, if you attempt to physically assault the legal property owner, you will leave this residence in the back of a squad car," the deputy warned, his voice dangerously low and commanding. "Go upstairs, get a single bag of clothing, and get out of this house immediately." Jamal ran down the remaining stairs, putting his trembling hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. Okay, we are leaving," he stammered nervously, physically pulling his hysterical wife away from the unyielding deputy. "Just give us 5 minutes. We are leaving right now. Please do not arrest her." They scrambled desperately around the massive living room, grabbing random handfuls of loose clothing, expensive toiletries, and unboxed electronics, shoving them indiscriminately into oversized, cheap black garbage bags. It was a pathetic, highly chaotic display of rapid downward mobility. The affluent, untouchable facade they had literally murdered their financial future to construct was currently being stuffed into heavy-duty trash bags under the watchful, unblinking eyes of armed law enforcement. I stood precisely in the center of the living room, watching the frenzied, humiliating evacuation with absolute clinical detachment. Marcus Sterling walked casually in through the broken front door, his sharp eyes rapidly sweeping over the massive space, taking mental inventory of the required repairs. He began rapidly barking orders into a sleek wireless headset, ignoring the crying, frantic couple completely. "Bring the industrial cleaning crew in immediately," Marcus directed, pointing toward the kitchen. "Have the locksmith replace the front and rear deadbolts right now. I want the deep clean completely finished by noon. The high-end staging furniture arrives at exactly 1 o'clock. We have our very first high-priority cash investor walkthrough scheduled for 4 o'clock this afternoon. Do not slow down." Jamal dragged 3 heavy, bulging garbage bags toward the shattered front door. He stopped on the threshold and turned to look at me one final time. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy of the commercial financial sector was entirely gone, permanently replaced by a broken, humiliated criminal nervously waiting for his inevitable federal indictment. "You won," he whispered, his voice incredibly hollow and defeated. "I hope you are happy, Madeline. You destroyed an entire family over a single house." I shook my head slowly, looking at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated contempt. "I did not destroy the family, Jamal. I simply and efficiently removed myself from the inevitable blast radius of your criminal destruction. Now get off my private property." He did not say another word. He turned around, picked up the black garbage bags, and walked out the front door. Brittany followed closely behind him, clutching a heavily scuffed designer handbag against her chest and crying hysterically. They trudged slowly down the sweeping brick pathway, their shoulders slumped in total, absolute defeat. They awkwardly loaded the trash bags into the cramped trunk of a battered, heavily dented silver sedan that clearly belonged to a bottom-tier budget rental agency. Their massive, shiny, luxury SUVs had completely vanished, most likely reclaimed by aggressive bank repossession agents earlier in the week. I watched quietly from the large bay window as Jamal desperately started the engine. The cheap sedan sputtered loudly to life and slowly rolled down the quiet, incredibly affluent suburban street, finally disappearing around the corner. The toxic parasitic infection that had plagued my entire adult life had been successfully surgically excised. Deputy Miller approached me, lowering his aluminum clipboard and clicking his pen shut. "The premises are completely clear, Ms. Hayes. The property is entirely and legally yours to control once again. We will wait outside by our vehicles until your professional locksmith officially secures the perimeter." "Thank you, Deputy," I said, offering a very polite, highly professional smile. The heavy rhythmic thud of thick construction boots loudly echoed through the foyer as Marcus's aggressive corporate staging team swarmed quickly into the house. They carried tall aluminum ladders, massive plastic buckets of industrial-strength cleaning supplies, and thick rolls of clear protective carpet film. The absolute ruthless transformation of the property was already beginning. The dark, lingering ghosts of my terrible family were being violently scrubbed away, painted entirely over, and systematically erased from the physical environment. I walked slowly through the massive, echoing, empty rooms, feeling an incredible, intoxicating surge of absolute power. The air inside the house no longer felt stifling, oppressive, or toxic. It felt incredibly expansive. It felt exactly like pure, unadulterated, victorious profit. Marcus Sterling was entirely correct about the incredible speed and sheer ruthlessness of the corporate real estate market. His aggressive staging team completely transformed the massive Oak Brook property in under 6 hours. They replaced the lingering sour stench of my family's desperation with the crisp synthetic scent of luxury aerosol sprays and freshly polished hardwood. The first high-priority cash investor walked through the shattered and newly repaired front door at exactly 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my office reviewing a binding, heavily fortified corporate offer for $750,000. The buyer completely waived all physical inspections, completely ignored the standard 30-day escrow period, and demanded an immediate closing. They were incredibly eager to flip the distressed property, and I was aggressively eager to be permanently rid of it. We executed the transaction entirely electronically. On Thursday morning, exactly 13 days after I first discovered the fraudulent mortgage inquiry on my credit report, I sat at my sleek desk and watched my computer monitor as the massive financial wire transfer successfully hit my primary checking account. The mechanics of the financial cleanup were highly efficient and entirely bloodless. I immediately logged into my secure banking portal and initiated a direct, heavily encrypted wire transfer directly to the Federal Fraud Division at Wells Fargo. I wired them the exact principal balance of the $700,000 forged loan alongside the negligible accrued daily interest. The massive, suffocating debt was instantly zeroed out of existence. The bank officially released the institutional lien on the property, formally and legally closing the horrific nightmare Jamal had arrogantly created. The remaining cash balance sitting comfortably in my checking account was exactly $100,000. It was my parents' liquidated retirement fund, legally classified by the state as compensatory damages for my severe emotional distress and my substantial legal expenditures. I did not return a single penny to them. I immediately transferred the entire six-figure sum into a high-yield, globally diversified index fund, securely locked exclusively under my legal name. The automated digital notifications from the major credit bureaus began arriving the very next Tuesday. Experian pinged my mobile device first, followed rapidly by Equifax and TransUnion. The federal banking investigators had officially concluded their rapid internal review of the forged origination documents I had provided. The massive toxic mortgage liability vanished completely from my financial profile as if it had never existed. The unauthorized hard credit inquiries Jamal had illegally initiated, using my social security number, were permanently and legally expunged. My pristine credit score, the exact financial asset they had so arrogantly attempted to hijack and destroy, instantly rebounded to its original immaculate state. The heavy, invisible chain my family had violently wrapped around my neck was legally and permanently severed. My financial identity was completely mine again, entirely cleansed of their parasitic fingerprints. Jamal did not simply lose his lucrative corporate job. The federal government does not take wire fraud lightly, especially when the digital evidence is handed to them on a pristine silver platter. Exactly 3 weeks after the police enforced eviction, I read the official press release published directly on the Department of Justice website. The United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois had formally indicted Jamal Davis on 4 federal counts of interstate wire fraud and 2 specific counts of aggravated identity theft. His former brokerage firm was actively cooperating with the federal prosecutors to save their own corporate charter. Jamal was facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Brittany was completely broke, entirely alienated from her former wealthy social circle, and currently living in a cheap, decaying motel on the outskirts of the city while nervously awaiting Jamal's federal arraignment hearing. My parents' fate was equally catastrophic, driven entirely by their own massive financial stupidity and profound arrogance. My father's desperate second mortgage was an unmitigated disaster. Without his liquidated federal retirement income to cover the exorbitant predatory monthly interest payments, they defaulted almost immediately. I received exactly 1 frantic, desperate voicemail from Susan sobbing hysterically about the bank initiating formal foreclosure proceedings on their longtime home. I listened to the pathetic message exactly once, feeling completely devoid of any human emotion, and then permanently blocked her cellular number. They had willingly gambled their entire financial existence to secretly fund a criminal enterprise, and the house always wins. They were going to legally lose their home, their arrogant social status, and their precious golden child, all in one sweeping, brutal stroke of karmic justice.